G'day, legends. Merry Christmas. And what did Dougie get you for Christmas? Well, not much. Just a complete and utter destruction of your perception of reality. The UFC world title. Is it legit? Is the UFC a legitimate fighting organization? Like, is the person who holds the UFC champion belt, is he the best fighter on the planet in that weight class? Obviously they are. Obviously they are. What? Like, why am I even asking that question? It's ridiculous. Like, clearly, Ilya Chadpuria and Big DP, they are clearly the best in the world. Old Muhammad, right? I mean, he'll get you nice and sleepy. He'll tuck everyone into bed. He is the perfect fighter to have on at 5 o'clock in the morning. But he is also the best welterweight in the world. So the belt must be for the best fighter in the world. But is it? Or is it cherry-picked matchups to help the promotion sell fun fights? Like, obviously, no one thought that Khalil Roundtree was any kind of a threat to Alex Pereira, or that old man Stipe was really up to the challenge of beating John Jones, who some people consider to be the GOAT of MMA, even though it's Mighty Mouse. You know what I mean? So obviously, it's a little bit of both. It's a mix of both. It's a little bit of a promotional tool as well as who is the best fighter in the world. That is really the question. But when is it too much a promotional tool? Like, if I gave you a glass of water, it is just refreshing on its own, yeah? But if I added some salt into it, well, now you've got a mild, nice electrolyte drink. However, if I continue adding salt into it, that drink then becomes toxic. So when is this is all fun and games too much toxicity? When is it ruining what the company is actually about? The UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championships. And this is very poignant because in the last, say, 24 months, we have lost the anti-doping agency of USADA. We have partnered with the world's biggest scripted fighting organization, the WWE. You know, 24 months ago, USADA was still there. WWE wasn't involved with the UFC at all. Now those things are gone, and the question remains, how much salt do you want in your water? How much do you want to water down your whiskey before it helps make that refreshing beverage nice and cool? Or instead, you're just drinking whiskey water. It's water with a little bit of whiskey in it. With all these answers, I would say you'd have to be looking at about 30% at max to have a legitimate belt of a legitimate fighting organization. But let's break down 2024, right? And let's have a look at all the men's title fights and see whether or not the UFC belt is actually a legitimate fighting belt, or whether or not what we're doing here is just playing a bit of a game and having fun. Starting off with UFC 297, Sean Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis. This is legit. This was a legit fight. Sean Strickland legitimately beat Israel Adesanya. Dricus du Plessis legitimately beat Robert Whittaker. He absolutely deserved to be there. That is 1 point to team the UFC belt is actually legitimate. Let's move on to UFC 298. Ilya Topuria versus Alexander Volkanovski. Did it break our hearts? Yes, it did. Was it legitimate? Couldn't have been more legitimate, quite frankly. Ilya Topuria 100% deserved to be there. Not looking good for my argument that the UFC belt isn't exactly very legitimate, is it? But let's move on to UFC 299. Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Chito Vera. Marlon Chito Vera, who had had a run of losses, gotten one win, and got thrust into a title fight against Sean O'Malley, when we all know it should have been Merab Dvalishvili. This was not legit at all. This is too legit to one not legit. Moving on to UFC 300. Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill. Jamal Hill coming back after being a former UFC champion, never actually losing the belt, only losing the belt to his own injury. Yeah, you could say that this one was legitimate, even though Magomed Ankalaev was lurking around in the background. This one could definitely be considered legitimate. That's 3 legit to 1 not legit. The UFC belt is for real, man. Until you get to UFC 301. Pantoja versus Usyk. Look, if this was a merit-based competition, anybody coming off a win higher than the ranked number 11th fighter in the world that had had more than 3 fights in the UFC would have been more eligible than Usyk. The only reason we didn't run with Usyk is because there's been so many rematches in the flyweight division. So no, this was when the belt was purely used as a promotional tool to sell a pay-per-view. That's 3 legit, 2 not legit. Moving on to UFC 302, where it was Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier. Massive Dustin Poirier fan. Great fight. I had it 2-2 going into the 5th round. Definitely was a banger. Not legit though. It should have been Gamrot. It should have been Gamrot. He was considered the backup fighter, not even 12. A couple of months before UFC 302, he was the backup fighter, and the UFC were trying to kill him off because he was so boring, and they knew that Dustin Poirier would be a way more enjoyable and fun fight for the fans. So they sent Dustin Poirier in there to go and get beaten up by Islam Makhachev, and Dustin Poirier had the absolute fight of his life, boys. But that does leave us tied up at 3-all, 3 legit, 3 not legit, interestingly moving up to UFC 303, which had to be saved last minute because Conor McGregor was never going to fight. He likes doing cocaine instead. And you got Alex Pereira versus Yuri Prochazka 2. Absolutely not needed, not legit. It should have been Magomed Ankalaev. Merit-based alone, it should have been Magomed Ankalaev. That's 3 legit, 4 not legit. Moving on to UFC 304, which I consider a very, very funny card to bring into this organization, bring into this conversation, because it's kind of one each way. It's one apiece here. Tom Aspinall versus Curtis Blades, which never should have happened. Number one, Tom Aspinall was the interim champion. He shouldn't need to fight again until he fought John Jones, right? So that's a not legit fight. And then not only that, it didn't even move heavyweight forward at all. What we ended up getting out of that was Tom Aspinall, the interim champion, walking in Tom Aspinall, the interim champion, walking out Tom Aspinall, the interim champion. This fight purely existed to help sell the pay-per-views and help sell tickets to the English fans. There is no other reason for this fight to happen. That is a illegitimate title fight when it comes to who is the best heavyweight in the world, who is the true heavyweight champion. This belt should have been nowhere near it. This fight shouldn't have ever been booked. However, on the other side of that equation, you do have a legit fight on that one. You have a legit fight on that one. Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad. So I guess you could say by the end of UFC 304, it's 4 legit, 5 not legit. Moving on to UFC 305. Now, competitive fight between Dricus du Plessis. Yes. Fun fight. Yes. Legitimate fight between Israel Adesanya and Dricus du Plessis. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Israel Adesanya gets 1,000 title shots without ever fighting a contender. He's finally going to fight a contender for the first time since 2019 in 2025. But with this one, he should have at least gone and fought one contender. And who should have been fighting for the title? Maybe instead of trying to shove Robert Whittaker down Khamzat Chimaev's throat, Robert Whittaker, who had done a ton of work, could have fought for the title at UFC 305 instead of always trying to book him up there. Or Sean Strickland, who was the champion, lost it by a bee's dick, lost it by the skin of his teeth in a split decision, went and fought a contender and got a win. Maybe Sean Strickland should have been offered a title shot. But no, they just handballed it to Israel Adesanya instead. Legitimate, not legitimate. UFC 305, not legitimate. That's 4 legit, 6 not legit. Moving into UFC 306. Yes, 100% legitimate fight, except for the outcome. Hashtag robbery. Hashtag justice for Sean O'Malley. But UFC 306 was a legit title fight. That's 5 legit, 6 not legit. Moving on to UFC 307. One of the most illegitimate title fight, legacy merchant fights. Alex Pereira versus Khalil Rountree. Khalil Rountree, number 8, coming off a drug suspension. This is a worse title opportunity than John Jones versus Stipe. This gave Alex Pereira the fighter of the year. Completely fake legacy. He shouldn't get fighter of the year because of this fight. This one should not count at all. This was a handball. The UFC protecting Alex Pereira. This was a gimme fight. On God. I don't hate Alex Pereira. If you watch the live streams, you know they all think I hate Alex Pereira. I don't hate Alex Pereira. But this was worse than John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. You had Magomed Ankalaev that had been pre-booked by the UFC, tied up by the UFC, and they just shoved in Khalil Rountree because they were hoping Alex Pereira would get a highlight, and he did. But it is definitely not a legitimate title fight. That's 5 legit fights, 7 not legit fights, moving into UFC 308. Super legit, doesn't need to be explained. UFC 309, Stipe Miocic versus John Jones. If you don't get why Stipe Miocic versus John Jones is not a legitimate title fight, you shouldn't be allowed to breed. There should be forced medical castration from the government, door to door, right? Yeah, in there. Hello. Hold up a photo of UFC 309. Do you know who these two are? Yeah. Do you think this was in any way justifiable? You do. You do you? Shoot him. 6 legit, 8 not legit. Moving on to the last title fight of the year. Should have been anyone successful in the top 10. Should have been Kai Kara France. I know they're all rematches, but you put Kai Sakura in there with, say, Steve Erceg or a Manelka. Anyone else, just get him one win to get him a shot at the title. Yeah, like Izzy had 10,000 shots at the title. Max Holloway has had 10,000 shots at the title. You keep wanting to push Cyril Gane up to their heavyweight title. Just because they're rematches doesn't mean that people online and keep doing them. Okay, it should have been anybody. It's not the merit-based fault that Pantoja keeps destroying everyone at flyweight. So if you're going off merit, there should have been 2 rematches for Pantoja this year instead of plucking someone else out from another organization and shoving them into the title picture when they clearly should not have been there and used purely as a promotional tool to bring on the Japanese audiences into the UFC. Final count. You have got 6 legitimate title shots mixed in with 9 illegitimate title shots. That is 60% of the title shots given out in the UFC. An organization that is partnered with the WWE and does its own in-house drug testing are illegitimate title shots. So, is the UFC belt really about the best fighter in the world? Facts being what they are, you can say, no, it is not. It's got nothing to do with the best fighter in the world. It's got everything to do with who can sell the most title fights. Is the UFC a legitimate fighting organization? They run their own drug testing. 60% of the title fights are not legitimate title fights at all. They are partnered with the biggest scripting fighting organization in the world. And if you look at the way the judging goes, generally the prospect or the star sort of gets the rub when it goes to the judging. We all know this from the past. Is the UFC a real organization? Not really. Do you care? Look, that's totally up to you. That's totally up to you if you care or not. Look, if I was to give you a cold glass of beer, you'd absolutely love it. You know, you'd start drinking from it. But if I was to stand on the bar and stand over that beer, get it out and start pissing in it, at what point do you not want to drink that beer anymore? I would hazard a guess that you would probably ask me to stop pissing in your beer well before we got to a 60-40% ratio, beer to piss ratio, piss to beer ratio in that glass. I would guess that you'd ask me to stop before we got there. But hey, how legitimate does this organization need to be for you to enjoy it? That's totally up to you. Merry Christmas. Sorry to burst your bubble, but yeah, the UFC, is it a real thing? They're real fights. They are fighting each other. So there you go. Let me know down there in the comments. How much has this shattered your reality? Do you really care if the UFC is 100% legitimate, merit-based or not? Or are you just happy that we get exciting fights to look forward to every couple of weekends? Let me know about it down there in the comments. If this is your first time here, g'day, my name is Dougie. I make an MMA video every single day of the week, and I try and go live about 3 times a week. So if you want to join in, hit that subscribe button down there. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. Until then, Merry Christmas, and I'll see you all in the next video.